Good morning, everyone. We welcome you all to our webinar today, Moving Beyond Checklists, the Dilemmas in Diagnosing Autism in Children. As many of you would know, Action for Autism is a pioneering parent organization that works in the field of autism, touching the lives of many people. We work across age groups and skill levels in early intervention to adult living. Today, we have Dr. Nidhi Singhal, the Director of Research and Trainings at Action for Autism, in conversation with Dr. Vibha Krishnamurthy. Dr. Vibha is a developmental pediatrician with 27 years of experience in working with children with disabilities and their families in India. She is a founder of Ummeed Child Development Center in Mumbai, which is one of the India's leading not-for-profit for children with disability and their families. We're delighted to have you with us, Dr. Vibha. Over to you, Nidhi. Oh, I think we lost Nidhi to the internet connection. Just give us a minute and we'll be back.
In the meantime, I'll just say hello to everybody and thank you for being here on a weekday, working weekday morning. And excited to have our conversation together. I think what Tanvi was going to say shortly is that I hope Nidhi and I will be in conversation for about an hour or a little over. And then I know that everybody has lots of questions, and then we can both sort of discuss the questions after that.
So, because of the technical glitch, Nidhi is not here and she's trying to join back. But by then, because so many of us have already joined, Dr. Vibha, would you like to start and share with us with a big picture of what is happening in the, autism field in India?
Okay. I think the idea of today's discussion really was to talk about some of the recent questions and dilemmas we've had when, sorry, I can see someone saying that the voice is not okay. तो सबको सुनाई दे रही है कि नहीं?
I think, Dr. Vibha, you're very much audible. I
Oh,
request anybody who's having difficulty to rejoin or use earphones, headphones.
okay.
Thank you.
So I'll just begin with a quick overview and saying that things have changed a lot in the last 30 years or so since I've been seeing children on the spectrum. And particularly, I want to address the context of India also. When I started out, it was DSM-4, and now we have DSM-5. Similarly, with the ICD, or the International Classification of Diseases. I think some things have changed dramatically in the last few years. And I'm going to say what has changed is the voices of self-advocates coming in loud and clear, sort of telling us about their own experiences, the value or not value of having a diagnosis. I think those have been the most recent changes that have added to our understanding, for which I, as a professional, certainly am very, very grateful for those voices. And so I'll just begin with saying, yes, there has been a big change. Some of the core ways of looking at autism in terms of the areas of differences haven't changed. But I think diagnostic criteria have changed. It has expanded the autism spectrum, but at the same time, moved away to club together all the different parts of the spectrum as autism spectrum disorder, compared to when I started out, which was very much autistic disorder, PDD, NOS, and Asperger's syndrome, which come under the umbrella of, used to come under the umbrella of pervasive developmental disorder. We don't hear that anymore. And we can debate the advantages and disadvantages of lumping everything together versus splitting it apart. But I think the fact is, yes, there has been a lot of difference in the way we have looked at this. Tanvi, any luck with Nidhi?
Not so far, Dr. Vibha. I'll
Uh,
just check again.
can you check if she can join on her phone, maybe?
Yes, yes, sure.
Okay, I think I did have a question here. Okay. I think someone has asked, well, a very, very good question to start out with. Oh, is Nidhi here, Tanvi?
She'll be joining in soon, so not right now.
Okay. So I think someone had a question about how do we know this is not something temporary? How do I know this is autism? And which is primarily where we begin with, how is a diagnosis of autism made? So to date, autism continues to remain a clinical diagnosis. So it is not hinging on a blood test or an MRI or any specific test that gives you a diagnosis of autism. It is still very much a clinical diagnosis based on a detailed history, based on observation of the child in different settings. So, to have a diagnosis of autism, broadly, you have to have two basic areas in which you see differences. The first is what we call social communication. So, in that, we are looking at the communication part, particularly the part of communication. Sorry, Tanvi, are you wanting, is Nidhi the co host now?
Yes, yes, Nidhi's
Okay.
here.
Nidhi, should I stop and let you take over, please?
Please complete. I'm so sorry about all the technical issues. Just go ahead, Vibha, complete what you were saying.
Tanvi, I was wondering if you could pin me and Nidhi so that it's easier for
Yes, was
everybody.
about to do that. Sure.
Okay.
Done, Dr. Vibha.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Nidhi, you want to start?
Sorry about this, Vibha. So sorry, this was not exactly how it planned. It was a planned for, but yeah. So I kind of heard a little bit about how you did start talking about autism and how the criteria has changed. And what I was really wondering, we've had all of these side conversations, and these conversations have also been about how the awareness levels are changing, right? The internet is in flux with so much of information. So, how about let's start from there? What is really going on? It's fabulous to have all of this information online. I know that we are seeing a lot of shift even in when parents are coming in and talking about autism. Some of them have already identified it. Some people are, generally diagnosing it themselves because of all the information. And I'm sure you at Meet have also noticed some of this. But what's really going on here? What's happening? And especially in the evaluation processes.
Um, okay, so Nidhi, I was wondering if I could complete what I was saying because there was a question on the chat which was asking a very fundamental question about how do we know that this is not a temporary condition and not autism? And so I was just giving an overview of autism, the autism diagnosis, right? And talking about the fact that there are broadly three areas, but two of them are clubbed together, which is called the social communication part. And the social communication part is to do with not just, so language has three parts. If I were to very crudely, please, any speech therapist here, please excuse me. So we have the part where we express ourselves, and that could be either verbal or non-verbal. So we use speech, but we also use expressions like that. We use pointing, we use gestures. And so there is the nonverbal, our facial expressions. There's the nonverbal part of communication, as well as the verbal part of expressive communication, what we say to others or what we communicate to others. There's another part, which is how we understand, how I respond to an instruction that's given to me, a story that's told to me, what I understand of it. But the third very important part is the interactive or the engaging to and fro part of communication. And that's often referred to as the pragmatic aspect of language or the social use of language. It begins very early. Even when a baby is 3 or 4 or 5 months old, you hear the back and forth cooing, right? When you talk to a baby and say, hello, who's that smiling at me? And you pause, and the baby goes, right? The baby is trying to keep that communication going back and forth. So I think that very important part of back and forth is very critical to communication. So in children with autism, what we're often noticing is a difference in the way they communicate with you. So instead of, if they want something, often families will tell me that he will take me to what he wants, or they will bring their shoes to tell me that they want to go out, right? And that's often a lot more difficult. Lugging your parent all the way to what you want is kind of difficult. It would be easier to just look at your parent, look at what you want, and point to it. Right? And likewise, the reverse way, to be able to understand that somebody is trying to get my attention to share something with me. If I say to you, hey, look, and I point there, immediately you're going to look there as well. Right? And often with children with autism, the family will tell me, I know he can hear because he comes running from any room if he hears his favorite piece of music. But when I call out or I try to draw his attention or call her name, she doesn't come and she doesn't look. So this aspect of, so there's the expressive and the receptive part, which are different, but most importantly, the pragmatic part or the to and fro part, right? Being able to often talk in full sentences when there is a need. But when I say, hey, I had my favorite ice cream yesterday, to be able to respond with, what's that? What's your favorite ice cream? Mine is chocolate, right? Requires the child or the adult to notice that I have made a comment to talk about my interest and respond to it with what I think is socially expected of me, right? So this to and fro aspect of language is often what is different that we see in young children with autism. This is such a developmental progression that it is usually not temporary. There is nothing temporary about how language develops. Language, like all developmental things, develops sequentially. So if you find that a child says full sentences but doesn't respond to their name, that's a red flag for you that there's something different about this, right? Usually the two go in parallel, and often understanding precedes ability to express yourself. So this is unusual. And I'll quickly come to the other part of autism, which is different, which is the interest. So the repetitiveness or the narrow range of interests that we see, the repetitiveness could be a behavior that children, which is often referred to as self-stimulatory behavior, or some people shorten it to stimming, which children may need to regulate themselves, right? Especially when they're anxious, upset, excited. They may, we all do things when we are anxious or upset. I know that I run my hand through my hair when I am thinking. So we all do things like that. And children with autism do have repetitive behaviors. It could be hand flapping, it could be looking at your fingers. It's also unusual sensory interests, being very interested in looking at a particular kind of light, or being bothered by some sensory issue like a sound or a texture that bothers you. So that's the other piece, right? In a more verbal child, it may look like a very narrow range of interest or a deep interest in something. I had one young woman with autism tell me that I said, "What are your interests?" And she said, "I'm interested in cats. I really like cats." I said, "Oh, how nice." And she said, "No, no, you don't understand. When I say I like cats, I really like cats." And so she was obsessive to the point of drawing them, looking up information on them. She's probably going to be a fantastic researcher, and so I think that is another area that we see that's an area of difference. So to summarize, for the person who asked that question, these diagnostic criteria remain the same. More verbal, less verbal, other things going on, not going on. We can talk about those. But broadly speaking, these differences remain the same across the age span. Yeah. Sorry, Nidhi, should I jump to your question? So what's going on nowadays? And I talked a little bit about it. Um, I think what's different is because of the amount of information available out there. For one thing, it can be empowering because you are not totally dependent on professionals to make that diagnosis for you. I think it can empower you to find out sooner, earlier. We have to remember, though, that ours is a country of enormous disparities. There is a big difference between marginalized communities or communities who are more rural, um, and their access to information from the internet, as opposed to like a city like yours or mine, Nidhi, Delhi or Bombay, where we have so a lot of people have access to internet and looking up information. So I think in the vast majority of India, it is still a concern, and it is a big discrepancy between how early we see kids from marginalized communities versus how late we see kids from marginalized communities versus how early we are able to see it in more privileged populations. So there is that difference also. But today, if I see a family from Bombay, I will rarely see them not having considered the diagnosis at all. Like, I don't see families who say, autism, what is that? Right? Because it's there in media, it's there not always in the best of ways, but it is there, right? It is being spoken about, you are hearing it. I think the other thing that has happened is I see, and we spoke about this before, I have started to see young people who have self diagnosed, and people who are pushing their parents to say, get me a diagnosis. I think this is what I'm dealing with, and you need to find me someone who will help me make that diagnosis. And so that is a difference I'm seeing. I see people who have already taken questionnaires and so forth online, and then they come to me with that information, often with very skeptical parents, by the way. The children have found their way somehow, and often the parents are skeptical. So, yeah, there is a big difference that I'm seeing.
Thanks, Vibha. And it's so consistent with what we see here, because we are getting a lot of young people who are getting diagnosed or identified in their late or early adulthood or late adulthood. And all of them always mention how they had sense that they were different even as a child. So now the fact that they are making a shift and looking things up is, I think, something for us to consider as professionals and as parents, right? I'm just curious to understand, how do you navigate that with parents in two ways? One, who are skeptical about it, but also in terms of acceptance, because despite all the knowledge about autism, we still think of, I mean, I think there's a huge discrepancy about understanding just autism as a disability versus a significant disability, and all the misconceptions or the myths around that.
Yeah, I think it is hard for families. And, the same goes about sharing the diagnosis. I think it's, even once they get a diagnosis, to share it. I think it's been really helpful for me to talk to young autistic adults and get their feedback on what their journey has been like. Um, I have yet to meet an autistic adult who told me, I wish I hadn't known that soon, or I wish I had found out later. I don't think I've met anybody like that. Maybe there are, and I'd love to speak to them if so. But most of the young adults I've met have told me that the diagnosis was a relief. And by the way, I just want to tell everybody that I'm using children with autism and autistic children interchangeably, because I know that there are some families who prefer the former, and most self-advocates I know prefer the latter. So please excuse me if you prefer one or the other. So I think I use that as an argument for, or a way to tell parents that, and also with many of the young people, my question to them is, you've obviously spent much more time researching this and reading about it than I have, right? And than I have in your context, right? So you've invested a lot in this. What will it mean for you to have this diagnosis? What will it make possible for you? And when I asked them that, and I did ask someone recently, and she said, it would just be such a relief to know that, that firstly, that I'm not lazy or stupid or a dork or a geek or whatever, terms have been applied to them. It would be just a relief to know that there's a name for this difference that I have felt all along, right? And it's not my fault. It would be a relief to know that it's not my fault, that the shame and the guilt that surrounds not knowing what's different about you, or why people are expecting you to do something that feels so alien to you, is a big relief. And the second thing is access to a community, right? To know that I'm not alone, and there's a whole community of families and children out there who have been through what I've been through, who share my experience. I think that too is a big thing for most young people who seek the diagnosis. And I use those two to convince parents that it may actually help their child be a lot happier. And I often share that, the eye doesn't see what the mind doesn't know. And until I did my fellowship in developmental pediatrics, I didn't know that so many people in my family were on the spectrum, people who I love, people who I admire. And it was really nice for me to know why they were the way they were. And so I think that there's that shared understanding that.
Thanks, Vibha, for that. I'm sorry, I am recovering from a flu and the Delhi pollution is not helping. So I don't know if I'm loud enough. My voice is completely gone, but okay, great. So, I want to just go back to something that you had said about, when you were explaining us about language and the pragmatic part of the language. Now, I just I wanted to come back to some of the things that are very confusing for people, and it kind of ties up with something you were saying about temporary diagnosis. How do you differentiate between social pragmatic communication, say, for example, or you spoke about the sensory piece within autism, right? And there are so many confusions, and we often get asked, and parents and both, I think, professionals as well, are very confused about, are these overlaps? Are these co-diagnoses or comorbidities? Are these, is it autism or not at all?
So, Nidhi, I think there are, I'd like to divide it into two, or actually even three. Okay. Because I think there's one group of conditions which are clearly differential diagnosis, means it's either one or the other, right? There's one group of conditions which could be comorbidities or happen along with autism. And then there's one group of conditions where there's a lot of overlap, right? In terms of they're different, but there's overlap, right? So I'll explain what I mean. Maybe we can dive into social communication disorder or pragmatic language disorder and autism. And I think if you look at the diagnostic criteria, they're very, very similar. It's just that the second part, which is the piece about restricted range of interest, repetitive behavior, stereotypies, sensory issues, they're not there, right? And very often when I see young children, right, very young children, between 18 months to 3 years, they don't have these repetitive behaviors or stereotypies, or families haven't noticed it, right? And or the preoccupation in one area of interest that hasn't become very evident yet, right? So I may make the diagnosis of social communication disorder because I haven't met the criteria. But quite honestly, in my clinical practice, I tell the families that the social communication part, the language and the social issues that we are talking about are very similar to children with autism. Right? And so some of the ways that we are going to approach this are going to be very similar. Right? So I introduce the idea of similar to autism to them. And as and when we move along in the process of working together, therapeutic interventions, environmental interventions, I know that the same things are going to work, right? So just because there is the other criteria are not there, doesn't mean that I'm going to say, well, I'm not going to intervene at all. I'm not going to do anything at all. It doesn't matter, right? I mean, there was a large study of parents who were asked, would you rather know sooner rather than later, right? If there is ambiguity, would you rather wait that the physician tells you until there is no ambiguity? And almost unanimously, it was a huge percentage, 80 odd percentage of parents said, no, I want to know sooner because I want to intervene. We know the advantages of early intervention. We know that the sooner we step in and support children and families, the more positive our outcomes are going to be, whether it's in terms of language or schooling or whatever. So I think I do like to bring that in as, yes, these are two conditions that overlap. The language criteria are very similar, and the reason you're here means that you wanted to seek help. So let's begin that, and we'll monitor it and see. I feel very comfortable the older I get saying that I'm not sure. So, I'm seeing the child for 1 hour, and I think families have seen their children 24/7 all their lives. So am I going to come in there and say, be very absolute? I'm not going to do that, right? In terms of things that are differential diagnosis, there are some things that we need to roll out, right? I think one of the common things that I get is actually selective mutism or language delays, right? So, for example, in a child with isolated language delays, right, whether it's expressive alone or expressive and receptive, I look for the social aspects of communication, right? Is there nonverbal communication, facial expression, gestures, body language? I also look at play. to see how is their, pretend play, their interest in imitating, their interest in participating in games with peers. I would look at all of those, right? And that helps me distinguish, is this language alone or is it social communication? And of course, the repetitive or the narrow range of interest bit, right? So that is one thing. The other thing is selective mutism. So selective mutism is actually a type of anxiety in children where they freeze in situations which are either anywhere outside the home or places and people that they are very, very comfortable with. So it may be that this child is very comfortable at home. In fact, parents will say this child talks 19 to the dozen at home, is rambunctious, running around, bossy with his sibling, all those things. But in school, it's a response to anxiety. When the body is exposed to something that makes you very anxious, you either fight or you flee, fight, flight, or freeze. This is the freeze response, right? So you are not able to speak. You really can't. And so the child is very different at home and very different in school, and or in public situations or in front of strangers. And the family will tell me that they are just not able to speak in those settings. And when you get this picture of two very different children in one setting versus another, then you have to consider selective mutism. Of course, in the category of language delays, I would also put hearing impairment. Very, very important. Whenever you have a child with language delays, you must get a hearing test to rule out hearing loss, because we know that intervention will make a dramatic difference there also. So that is the differential diagnosis. I haven't gone into some of the others, but I'm going to talk about some which are going to be differential diagnosis as well as overlap diagnosis, right? So the first I'm going to say is intellectual disability, right? Or global developmental delays. You have a child who's delayed across the board, not just in social communication, as we have seen, but is delayed gross motor skills, fine motor skills, visual problem solving, right? The most common pattern you see in children with autism is that there are some areas like self-help skills, like problem solving skills, visual problem solving skills, that are the area of strength. So the family will tell me, देख के सब समझ लेता है, देख के सब करता है. He can look and learn and do things. He can solve problems. She can do puzzles. She's able to, they are able to, figure out how to get to that thing which is far away. They can do that kind of problem solving. They never forget a route to any place, and they can find their way wherever they are. So those are the kinds, or on the computer screen or the phone screen, oh, they know they're not saying a word and they're not engaging with other kids, but boy, they know how to get to that YouTube video that they want to go to. They've cracked my phone code and they can access it. Right? So these are things that we often hear in children with global developmental delays or intellectual disability. It is across the board in all areas, right? In problem solving, in visual problem solving, in self-help skills, being able to feed themselves, dress themselves. So those areas are delayed as well. Sometimes people think that the two can't coexist, right? So can children with Down syndrome have autism? Of course they can, right? Can children with Fragile X syndrome have autism? Yes, it is more common in children with Fragile X syndrome than the general population. So we must remember that there can be overlap between the two, and we need to look for the overlap. It often becomes a question of, is it worth making a diagnosis of autism in a child who already has a diagnosis of intellectual disability? And that's a very individual call. I mean, to the clinicians here, I will say that you have to say, will it be an advantage to the child and family in terms of intervention to make a diagnosis of autism in addition to intellectual disability? Will it change the way you teach this child? Will it change the way you interact with this child? I think it's very important to consider that. And the second bit of very common overlap, and I'll stop speaking after that because I'm speaking nonstop, is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I have to say that ADHD is the most common, what shall I say, misdiagnosis that we see. The child will have been diagnosed with ADHD and put on meds. And when you see the child, you can clearly see it's not just about hyperactivity. It is obviously about communication or social interaction that is different. And then you know that you have to address the autism and not just the ADHD, right? There have been children who have been on the spectrum, who I've seen very early, and the focus at that time was communication and so forth. And then a few years later, the rate limiting factor in school becomes the attention. And then at that time, we pay attention to the attention or focus issues, and we address those. So it really depends what is interfering with the child's life. How is the autism affecting the child's life? How is the ADHD affecting the child's life at that point? So I'll stop.
Thanks, Vibha. I have a follow-up question on what you were just saying, especially for young children, right? We hear a lot of this child has ADHD rather than autism all the time from the parents and from the teachers, especially the educators in school. Is ADHD, especially if it is an autistic child, and operating in a set of environment which are not necessarily conducive to him or her, is hyperactivity more visible, or is it the right time to diagnose ADHD, or is it something that, would you say that we should wait, figure out the environment first? What would you suggest?
I think there are multiple things with ADHD. I think a diagnosis of ADHD depends on so many things, right? Because attention depends on so many things. How much attention you're able to pay depends on what is your developmental age. So one thing we have to look at is the child's attention, focus, ability to sit appropriate for the child's age, developmental age, not chronological age. So, but is it appropriate for the child's developmental age? The second is, attention obviously depends upon the environment for all of us, right? I mean, and I'm talking about the internal and external environment. So if somebody here is sleep deprived, has been on call last night and is listening to this, I know your attention is flagging, right? Because we are 40 minutes into it, you're feeling sleepy. Unless you've had several cups of coffee. And it depends on the external environment. Those of you who are sitting in a noisy environment, or your child is going to ask for your attention any minute now, you're a little bit on edge, it is hard to pay attention in that setting. So we have to pay attention to the context also. What are we expecting of this child in a particular context? In very young children below the age of 6, I prefer not to make the diagnosis of ADHD, right? I'm being very clear here, because there was actually a very old, very large study which looked at children who were referred for attention, the 3 criteria for ADHD, right? Inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. And there was a large study that I believe in the 80s at Children's Hospital, which looked at, the profile may have changed a bit now. But when children are referred in the preschool age group under the age of 6, 2/3 of them do not end up having ADHD. It can be language delay, it can be autism, it can be age appropriate, it can be the environment, it could be trauma, it could be several other things. So it's very important to look for why is the child showing this behavior? So then we get into our functional analysis of the behavior, right? We see a behavior. And by the way, hyperactivity cannot be a behavior, right? The behavior has to be something that's measurable. So if you tell me, doc, my child is hyper or hyperactive, right? I want to know, what does that look like, right? When does it happen? How often does it happen? Where does it happen? So then we start looking into, okay, hyperactivity looks like him getting up and moving about, right? Not sitting in his seat. It looks like not responding when the teacher tells everybody to stand in line, right? It happens only at school, not at home. Also in school, it happens usually in circle time when they're telling a story, and it doesn't usually happen during puzzles or snack time, right? So there are all these things that we need to look at, what is happening before and what is happening after, right? And if for example, what is happening after, every time he gets up and goes to the door, the teacher runs after him and he starts running further, and they're both running in the corridor, and the teacher's getting red in the face. I mean, this sounds like real fun in school. So, this child is obviously getting a lot of reinforcement from doing that. But the before, I would say, is very important to see. Because if the child is not understanding stories and he's expected to sit in circle time, if the child doesn't know where he is supposed to sit, what is going to happen after this, and what his role is, of course he's going to get up and move, right? So I think these are, as you very rightly say, Nidhi, in very young children, a diagnosis of ADHD, even in addition to autism, may not be appropriate. And I would definitely hesitate to start medications in a child who's younger than 5 to 6 years old. I would hesitate. I'm not saying I have never done it, but I have very rarely done it in a child younger than 5 to 6.
Thanks, Vibha. That's hugely. I just now want to go back to, talking about people who are non-speaking. In the recent years, we are hearing the voices of speaking autistic people, right? A lot more. And there is this whole conversation that's happening that, is autism depicted or represented only by the speaking autistic people? And if I'm non-speaking, does that make me profoundly autistic, or my needs any less? So you're talking about the Elon Musk variety of, so to say, autism. And I just want to know your
Sorry, Nidhi, I didn't get the last part.
Elon Musk sort of variety of autism and your thoughts around that. What we can do, really. Also, to kind of just to highlight, non-speaking autism may not necessarily be profoundly autistic. So if you could just talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I think the debate makes me a little sad, actually, because I think there is space to respect all parts of the spectrum. It's not either or, like I said at the beginning, there are some advantages to looking at it as a spectrum, and there are some disadvantages, right? I think the disadvantage that a lot of parents of children who have greater needs because of their physical limitations or behavioral challenges or inability to communicate, families feel frustrated because they feel the self-advocates are advocating for environmental changes more than services. And yes, they're saying, yes, we do need those, but don't deny us services, or don't say you don't really need anything other than a, kinder world, right? Because we do need help. Yes, we need a kinder world, but we need respite. We need, speech therapy. We need support in schools. And it seems trivializing to them that some of the very, I'm going to say, verbal and vocal folks say that the needs are different. And I absolutely understand that, coming from there, because somebody is not able to sleep at night, is staying up nights wondering, what am I going to do about this child's future, all of those. And I have enough families who I follow who fall in that end of the spectrum. Speaking to the folks who are verbal, less needing of physical or immediate support, but definitely have suffered tremendously, say, because of bullying, because of exclusion, because of not knowing why they are different and haven't had a platform to talk about the trauma they've been through, either in school or being dragged to see someone for treatment, or that they have simply that has not allowed them to be who they are. I get that end of the spectrum also. And I think there is great importance to all of us understanding that both ends exist. Their needs may be different, and even though the pattern may be similar, the qualitative aspect of what their needs are, how they are functioning, may be very, very different. And again, we go back to context, right? I mean, it depends on the context of both also, how much support they have. So yeah, I think that's going to be, we have to say this and that, not this versus that. And I think that's the crux of the whole thing. Both exist, both have their individual needs, both need to be respected, and we need to individualize how we support children and families.
Thanks, Vibha. When you talk about the spectrum, I'm reminded of this young person, an autistic person, who explained the spectrum to me one time, and how we think about it either as a linear or either a horizontal or a vertical spectrum. And I think a lot of professionals, neurotypical people perhaps, are doing a hierarchy around it, or even talking about it as a linear spectrum. And what I learned was how a lot of autistic people think of it as a Rubik's Cube, which is multiple colors on every facet or every side of the spectrum. So, it's like a mix of colors. Some people have some skills and some others have different skills, but it's always a mix of colors. And I thought that was a great way of me figuring out or understanding autism without having to confuse it with hierarchy. So I'm glad that you talked about, and I thought that was very interesting about conceptualizing it as a Rubik's Cube, which makes perfect sense considering a lot of them have it.
Thank you for that analogy. I'll definitely use it. I think it's lovely.
All right. So moving on to, we've spoken about ADHD, we've spoken about autism. I really do also want to talk about IQ testing in autism, and both ways, right? We need IQ testing, or we're asked to do IQ testing to get a disability certification. You also spoke about global developmental delay and then autism, right? So it's like, does it have to be one with the other? Are the IQ tests really geared towards autism, or the way they are conducted? I'm not even talking about tools per se, but the way they are conducted.
Yeah, I think especially in a child with autism who hasn't had intervention or is early in the process of getting support, is not used to, and you just think about the context in which IQ testing happens, right? It's an unfamiliar person, an unfamiliar place, a time-bound process. There is pressure, of course. So anybody would be enormously anxious in a setting like this. If I got an IQ test, I'd be a bit stressed, right? So I think expecting children to perform, especially children with autism, to perform in a setting like that is quite absurd. And also trying to test autism, or trying to give an IQ test or an answer based on a single test. Like I've seen people use a Seguin form board, for example, which is just a form board, right? And is so reductive in how you think about a person's IQ and potential, that I would absolutely not accept that. I have seen parents coming to me devastated with, low double-digit scores of IQ or single-digit scores of IQ. Just absurd, because obviously the child was not scorable, and also it is not a measure of what your child's potential is, right? Um, Especially in autism, when you have such an uneven cognitive profile, there is no way on earth that a standard IQ test can measure the child's intelligence, right? So I really think, when people are using it for the purposes of, I don't know, school or getting a certificate, you just do what you have to do. And I tell parents, now put it away. You've got your certificate, fine, just put it away. Now let's see, where is your child at now? What are your hopes and dreams for your child? Let's see how we can get there. And let's move on with it, because I don't think it's meaningful oftentimes. In very verbal children, who are able to sit, sometimes an IQ and an educational assessment is helpful. It kind of can draw out what are the areas in which the child needs support, right? So subtle language issues like inferencing or organizing your thoughts to write it in sequence, these can come up in an educational assessment, which can be valuable in terms of helping the child in terms of writing skills or comprehension, those kinds of things. But per se by itself, so there are more nonverbal tests of intelligence exist, and those may be perhaps more accurately assessing a child's nonverbal intelligence than a test that has both verbal and nonverbal in a less verbal child. I'll say that. But overall, I would say I don't know how much it contributes to our supporting the child and family. Nidhi, can I say something? There are lots of people here who've asked for tools. And, they mentioned the INCLEN tool, the ISA tool, ADOS, ADI. So let's talk a minute about the tools and say multiple tools are available, right? The INCLEN tool is broadly based on the DSM-5 criteria. And it is a government recognized tool, but keep in mind that it is done in a hospital setting and so forth. Somebody when I briefly glanced through the comments had said, sometimes as a clinician, the child is on the spectrum, but every single criteria is not being met. And I would go back to the fact that, sometimes it takes a while for you to observe the things that you're looking for, and families may know better. And I think a rich history along with the observation is really critical. The trouble with a lot of the other tools like ADOS, ADI, etc., is that they take very long. They take anywhere from 2.5 to 4 hours to complete. And then there is the scoring, and then there's a discussion. I think at Ummeed, we spend an hour on a visit at least with every family. And even so, it's not enough quite often, right? So I think we reserve the ADOS or, diagnostic tests that take very long for families who specifically requested because some school has asked for it, or for families where or for children where there is some ambiguity. We're not sure. We think this will supplement the kind of observation and information we've gotten. Then we would do it.
Thanks. I mean, I think we've got a very similar thing. I think there is this one comment that I want to go to, and then we'll open it up to questions, Vibha. There is a comment from Isha which says that all of these tools are very important, but they're also fostering a model which is very deficit-based, right? And
Nidhi, sorry, I really
there is a comment from Isha, right, which is talking about how testing is important, but again, some of these tests, they foster a deficit-based sort of model, right? And we've discussed this about how to get a disability sort of certificate, you have to prove the disability, which is very, very deficit-based, unfortunately. A lot of medical models operating there. But just your comments on that. And, before we open it up to questions by the audience, just your thoughts around, is there a way that we can make the whole diagnostic process more neurodiversity affirming, if you have thoughts around that? So I just want to, and then Tanvi, will you moderate the questions, please?
I think, the fact that diagnostic processes focus on deficits, you can't deny that. Just look at the terms themselves, right? It's autism spectrum disorder. It is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So there is deficit and disorder in the same phrase. I think it is so much better when we think about disability as an interaction between the individual and the environment. And rather than think about it as an individual deficit. And, all of us are going to be disabled if we aren't already, right? With age, with illness, we're all stepping in and out of that process. I think the trouble is that the whole medical system is so geared towards the deficit now, to find out what's wrong and to fix it, right? And developmental issues don't lend themselves to that, right? And maybe in the future, there will be one part of the autism spectrum which will end up getting taken out the way, gender dysphoria is now called gender dysphoria and not gender identity disorder, right? It's not a disorder anymore. And hopefully someday that will happen with neurodiversity as well. But until such time, unfortunately, the assessment process to get certificates and things like that is still heavily leaning on the medical model. It's not acknowledging that an individual becomes disabled because of the environment that they are in. And not just by virtue of who they are. So I think it's really ongoing conversations between clinicians and families, and ongoing conversations the other way around. Families informing clinicians about how they want to be spoken to, talked about, what it means to them. There's a listening component on both ends. It's a work in progress. I know that I've come a long way in my understanding, and I have a long way to go. But I think it is a work in progress. Sometimes the process can be absolutely traumatic for children and families, especially the certification process. The hospitals are crowded, the doctors are overworked. There's one hospital in Bombay where, I don't know how it is in other cities, one hospital in Bombay, actually you're seen along with under trials, criminals. You're made to wait in the same place. And you just imagine what it's like for a child, right? It is awful, and I have no systemic answers at this point. But I will say that if they are following up with a clinician or a therapist, either a therapist or a doctor or whoever, I think it's important for families to talk about how hard it is for them, how traumatic it feels. I have learned so much about the big role that trauma plays in autism through adults, autistic adults, who have told me about their childhood experiences and what it felt like for them. And so I think it's very important to speak up and let people know what that experience was like for them. Hopefully, there will be a handful of people in the clinical services who want to make a difference.
Thanks, Vibha, and thanks for, I think giving back the responsibility on a lot of us, because like you said, it is about interactions. It is about the way we write reports, the way we ask the same questions that is also shaping or making it affirming or not. So thanks for that. And that I think is a very important part. And with that, I know there are loads of questions in the chat box. So
I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed looking at the number of comments and questions. I hope someone's curating them, Tanvi or
Tanvi, so I'm going to let Tanvi do the talking now.
Thank you, Nidhi, thank you, Vibha. Before we take up the questions, which are a lot in the chat box, and we'll take up the ones, but I request for a small feedback on this session, and I'm sending the feedback form in the chat box. So yes, it will just take less than a minute, and if you can fill. So let's start from the last question. Do you see a change in care, time, resources for autism children, even inside family system?
sorry, could you repeat that,
Sure,
Tanvi?
sure. I'll just. Do you see a change in care, time, resources for autism children, even inside family systems?
Um, that's a very broad question. I'm not sure what the person was intending to ask.
Yes.
I think I want to say that you know, families have, irrespective of the kind of family they are always enormously invested in the well-being of their child. They may come initially with the idea of um, fixing the child from a deficit approach. But I think over time, they get to a better place. I think what I have found very, very helpful is to notice the journey of families, because for every family, it's a journey. And I love the part when they feel ready to support other families and belong to the group of other families and ready to support them. We have a family resource center at Ummeed, as I'm sure many of the other spaces do also, which is by families for families, and I find it's it's hugely helpful for families to see other families who have walked the journey before them and to hear from them. I don't think any professional input can replace that. Someone with a shared experience or an experience that precedes yours. I'm not sure if I answered what the person was asking, but
Sudha, if you're with us, you can also unmute and have a conversation with Dr. Vibha.
Hi, can you hear me, doctor? Uh, I asked that in the context that when I see families, I am seeing a change because there is a family structure which is changing, where the mother is working and she's had a far longer career before she comes with a child with autism. Very often, the primary caregiver is a different person, and we are having the family systems changing, and we are getting a varied, different family systems coming in. So I wanted to know, how do you manage that? How do you advise when the systems are not the same as before?
that's such an interesting question. I mean, I think firstly, I would err on the side of hugely reassuring, not err, but I would hugely reassure a working mother that she did not cause her child's autism. That would be my primary goal at the first meeting. Because there's often so much guilt about I let him watch too much TV, I left her alone with somebody. I think also we all know that it takes a village really, and the more support the caregiver has, the less likely the caregiver will be overwhelmed and be able to support the child. We also know that the huge impact that of parental depression on child development. So if it means that the parent, the mother, uh, wants to continue working, it means a lot to her. I would totally support her in that journey. So we have to keep all these in mind. I get questions like, Doc, do you think I should stop working? Doc, do you think we should move to another country? Right? And the answer is never simple because it really depends on what it means for the entire family. I'm so glad you brought up the family systems because it is the well being of the entire family system that we have to take into account when we think about the well being of the child. So, the proximal environment for the child, the immediate environment for the child is the family. So we have to look at family well-being, and that would be my focus. Right? So, yeah, but thank you for asking that question. What a great question.
Thank you, Dr. Vibha. Uh, we have the next question by Dr. Deepika Jain. Can you please give your opinion on DSM-5 criteria for ASD, as it gives a level which may not reflect on the ability, especially when used as a diagnostic tool for young children?
Firstly, hi, Deepika. Nice to have you here.
Same here, doctor. Thank you so much for having me.
And I want to say that the severity part of the DSM 5, I'd love to hear Nidhi's views also on this because I have mixed feelings about it because I think sometimes it's not truly representative of the kind of support required. Here, the assumption is the more repetitive and stereotypic behaviors you have, and the less language you have, the more support you need. And therefore, again, as Nidhi says, it's linear. So it doesn't, I agree with you, Deepika, that doesn't quite sometimes tell you any given child and family at different points in time has different needs for support. And it's going to keep varying based on where they are in that point of time. And I'm not sure that it's really helpful to define mild, moderate, severe. I don't know, Nidhi, what do you think?
Completely with you. I'm not a big fan of DSM-5 here, not because of how it categorizes alone, but for several reasons. A, the language, B, the categorization, and C, there is a reason why there are a lot of people who are getting a diagnosis in their adulthood now. The criteria and all of us, based on that understanding, I think something is getting missed in their childhood, right? So I don't think it captures the entire breadth, depth of the spectrum, the examples. I also think that although I don't know if our understanding, which is coming from a lot of autistic people, is changing. I think it's far more nuanced, and I don't know if you feel that those nuances and the other diagnostic criteria are kind of capturing those nuances. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I totally agree, Nidhi. I totally agree. I think we've come a long way since DSM-5 in our understanding.
So a few people are asking about, at what age do you think we can also tell the child about their autism?
I am definitely going to turf that question to Nidhi. How's that?
I know you do that, but I think whenever the parent is ready, like you said, I've yet to hear a person say that I wish I had known it later, but I have heard a lot of young people say, I wish I did not have autism, and which is because the kind of language that's spoken about autism around them has not been the best description of themselves, right? So if we are going to say, I know this young person used to say, autism nikal do mere andar se. And the reason he said that was because for everything, you cannot make friends because tumhe autism hai. Your brother can go to a party because autism hai tumko, tum nahi ja sakte. So whenever a parent and the support system find those words, the goal has to be that we tell young people about autism, but we also need to find those words and that attitude so that we're giving a positive picture. Sorry, go back.
That is such a thoughtful response, Nidhi. I mean, I totally agree with that. And I wish I could encourage more and more families to make it so natural to talk about autism in their homes that um, it's part of differences, all kinds of minds. I would say yes to everything that Nidhi has said, and also I would add as early as possible. Right? If you hear Stephen Shore talking about his own experience, it's beautiful. He says, I never remember being sat down and told that I have autism. He says, I always remember it was part of the parlance in my home. It was part of the vocabulary. It was part of the language. We spoke very normally about autism. It was a presence in our lives. And so I wish we could make it like that more, like I do for a lot of other differences as well. So yeah, uh, I think both are answers.
There are two things that I would want that have been come in the chat box. So that one is virtual autism, and then the one is on medication, related to medication. You did talk about it, but if you can, highlight more about it. For medication, I can specifically say what the question is.
Sure.
Should I?
So
Okay.
I'll answer the first one.
Yes.
So virtual autism is this whole idea that autism can be caused by too much screen time, and that children become withdrawn and so forth. So there are a couple of studies that have linked. So firstly, I'm going to say it is not a medical diagnosis. There is no such thing as virtual autism in any diagnostic criteria, in any medical textbook, in any medical literature. It does not exist. Okay, so know that this is a TikTok diagnosis. It is not a real medical diagnosis. Please be aware of that. Second thing, should we seriously worry about screen time in children with autism? Yes, we should worry about screen time for all our kids, right? Because we know that social interaction, social communication is an area that children with autism are struggling with. And it's very important for them to have real-time one-on-one interactions with loving, caring adults and children in their lives. So yes, decrease screen time, increase interpersonal interaction, wonderful for all children. And it speaks to the same thing. You work with the most vulnerable in terms of this particular area, you make things better for everybody. So it is a good thing to do, period. Right? The third thing I'm going to say is, does excessive screen time cause autism? Now, that is a question which is very debatable. You see, because all the studies, for example, there was a large Japanese study that was published in the journal of in JAMA, and that showed that there was a correlation between TV viewing at 1 year and autism diagnosis at age 3. Right now, we have to know the difference between correlation and causation. Right? I can say people who shop at Decathlon have a far less risk of heart disease than people who shop at Shopper Stop. Because we did a study and we looked at all the people who went shopping in Decathlon and all the people who went shopping in Shopper Stop. And we found that if you went to Shopper Stop, you were much more likely to have a heart disease than if you went to Decathlon. Now, that's a kind of ridiculous assumption to take away, right? Clearly, because just think about it. If I went to Decathlon, I went for sports and athleisure wear, right? So I'm more likely to be exercising, I'm more likely to be playing sports, and far less at risk for cardiac disease, heart disease, than if I went to Shopper Stop, right? So why would I stop going to Shopper Stop thinking that it would cause heart disease, right? So this is the difference between correlation and causality. We must know that there's a difference. I could argue that all those kids at 1 year who were watching a lot of TV, it was really hard for their parents to engage them because they were less likely to be socially interactive, and therefore they ended up watching more screen time. Now, was the screen time good for them? No, it wasn't. It wasn't helpful for them. But I am very, very reluctant to say that it caused it because I don't know the answer to that. I don't have that proof at all. So virtual autism is not a thing. And I run the enormous, enormous risk of blaming a parent for allowing their child to watch too much screen and leaving them with their lifelong guilt that they caused autism in their child, which is completely unacceptable to me. I do not have the scientific data to make that statement. So that's my answer to that.
Vibha, before Tanvi brings in other questions, thank you for talking about causation and correlation. Do you think this also extends to all the vaccine-related studies and genetic-related studies and all of that too?
Vaccine-related studies is even less proof. Here I'm saying I don't have proof. Vaccines, I'm going to say it has been firmly disproven. Right. So, in fact, it's a long story, but the person who researched, who proposed that vaccines contain mercury and therefore that causes autism, um, especially the MMR vaccine. Now, keep in mind the MMR vaccine is given between 15 to 18 months, right? And when do symptoms or features of autism present? It's at 15 to 18 months, right? So it's very common to have the same timing of presentation. So again, correlation that around the same time the kids, were showing signs of autism, and I think it's really important to. There's one very important difference in case of vaccines. Not vaccinating a child is going to do much more harm, right? It can cause mortality. Your child can die of measles. America is seeing a huge wave of measles in adult populations, in younger children, and it is very scary to see that. Vaccines are very hard-won, earned victories of science where we have been able to prevent the death of children and serious morbidity of children. So we absolutely have to take a very strong stance against anti-vaxxers who say that vaccines cause autism, because vaccines save lives and there's no two ways about it. Tanvi, you want to ask the question about medication?
Yes.
So, Isha is asking, as you suggested, that before 6, it is often advisable to not put the child on medication. However, doctors suggest that it is better to start medication as early as possible. Another question by Dipinder. If it is interfering with the classroom attention, hitting other children, and not following any instruction at all, still would you recommend meds for a 4 year child? Would you not recommend meds for a 4-year-old child?
See, it's very easy for me to say, don't do meds, right? Because I know what the families are struggling with. But again, I'm going to tell you, especially in a young child, look at the environment and see, is it appropriate for this child to be sitting for this long? Is it possible for this child to pay attention for so much time? Have we worked towards building the child's sitting ability, attention span, all of which can be taught to the child using appropriate techniques like, using visuals, using various other techniques, which is not in the scope of today's talk. But I am going to say that consider changing the environment. See, when we talk about the deficit approach, well, then what is the alternative to the deficit approach? We talked about the fact that disability is an interaction between the individual and the environment, right? Some effort has to be made in building skills of the child, but a much bigger has to be made in changing the environment. And families need guidance on what do I have to change in the environment. Is your child in a school where there are 15 other children in the class? The expectation is that all the other children are neurotypical and therefore are sitting around for circle time, and your child does not sit because he's nonverbal. Okay. In which case, it's completely unrealistic, right? If you made me sit in a classroom in Slovenia and said you have to sit very still and listen, because I'm an adult, I won't get up and walk around. I'll probably fall asleep on the desk because I won't understand anything, right? Because the child is little, the child is 4, is getting up, walking around, moving away, getting away from the thing which is deathly boring and meaningless for him. And worse than deathly boring and meaningless is hugely anxiety provoking. Why are they getting upset with me when I'm getting up and going away when it's not making any sense to me? I don't understand what I've done that is upsetting people. So I think we do need to keep that in mind, whether the environment is appropriate for the child.
Can I ask a question, doctor? Yeah,
Sorry, please tell
this
me.
is Deepinder. Okay, I don't know whether I'm
Can't
visible
see
or
you.
not. Yeah, all right. So I have this. I am the one who posed this question, and this is not related to ASD, but this is specifically for ADHD. This boy is 4 years old, and he was referred for a lot of hyperactivity. In my clinical observation, he was hyper, running around, and so on and so forth. So I referred him for OT. He had OT for a good 4 or 5 months. Sitting came, but partially. The challenge which we are facing now is that he is still going for OT very regularly. They are having a social group of about 4 or 5 children, in which turn taking, in which sitting, listening, and all is being practiced, but it is not being applied in the school. So every day I have a long text from the mother which says that today he pushed a child, he's unnecessarily touching the laptop of the teacher, interrupting, hitting other kids. Now he started coming to me talking about visuals. I was using visuals about, when to stop, when to wait, and all of those. But in yesterday's session, I also realized that when I put a timer for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, this child was sitting. But he was so squirmish in his seat. And immediately, if my attention went here, he would go, he would pick up a ball, he would pick up something. And it was very, very difficult for him to actually contain himself. And similarly, in when I was talking to the mother, he would come interrupting, despite the mother telling him, Nahi karo. Now, the mother is a single parent. Background is the mother used to hit him. एवर सिंस नाउ द मदर सेज कि मैडम पहले तो कहना मानता था, अब तो आपने बोला है मारो नहीं, तो अब तो बिल्कुल ही बवाल मचाता है एंड इट इज वेरी डिफिकल्ट फॉर मी टू हैंडल. नाउ शी इज क्रिएटेड अ ग्रुप ऑफ ओटी बिहेवियर थेरेपिस्ट मी कि अब हम इस बच्चे का क्या करें. So it's that is my
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say, obviously, you know this child, and you've considered all the options. If you feel medication is the only recourse, I would do it with caution. In such a young child, evidence of side effects is much more. But I will also say, it sounds to me, first of all, that the parent needs some coaching and support, and the school needs some coaching and support. And going to an OT where he spends 1 hour, 3 days a week, or 4 days a week, or 5 days a week is really not going to change the rest of his life, right? Because he has to generalize those skills. And that has to happen only in an environment that supports that. So it sounds to me like the school is not an appropriate setting for him. And it sounds to me like the mother needs some support.
So I've been guiding the mother, but the school, they have two teachers. So they just let him be. I'm in Delhi, I'm in Gurgaon. All schools, they don't have less than 20, 25 children. And in some schools, they have a shadow teacher. But the mother says, why should I have a shadow for my child? And he just does not sit. Even if you have to physically hold him, he will not sit. So
Yeah.
it's a very, very confusing.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Dipinder, but here it will be good to take up general questions that are.
Yes, okay, thank you.
If you wish, we can always check with Dr. Krishnamurthy and plan a private consultation and take it forward there.
I would just say, Dipinder, I hear your distress and your desire to support this child and family, and say this is a very really a really difficult situation, and sounds like there's support needed all around, which is not available. So yeah, I mean, it may be a situation where you do consider meds early.
Thank you.
Monica, if you're with us, you can ask your question, please. Monica has a question regarding growing out of autism.
Do we want to do that?
Till the time Monica is joining us, we'll take up the next question. just so sorry. In about how many cases of autism we find a genetic cause by WGS, WES, CMA?
Okay, so it depends on what we are calling a genetic cause. And because it is now increasingly common, depending upon which study you look at, to find a lot of, so we could have single gene defects, right? So we could have Fragile X syndrome, we could have Rett syndrome, we could have tuberous sclerosis. These will form a much smaller percentage of kids with autism and an additional diagnosis. Now, with our increased technology and all the different ways of looking at the various genetic studies, the number keeps increasing. Every time I look, 30%, 40%. There are now studies which are looking at as many as that. And I think the reason is because we are recognizing the polygenic nature of how autism is caused. So what I mean by that is that there are multiple candidate genes that put you at risk. We are now understanding autism is a very complex genetic background where multiple things may put you at risk. And there may also be an interaction between genetic risk and environmental risk. So, for example, if there is, maternal ill health along with a genetic risk, the likelihood of having autism increases. Prematurity and IUGR, the likelihood of autism along with these genes will increase, right? So it's multiple risk factors coming together. So in addition, if you have childhood illnesses, which are particularly, affecting the brain of the child. So for example, congenital rubella. If the mother has congenital rubella, the chances are much higher that the child is going to have autism plus other disabilities. So I think it's now become hard to give a simple answer to that question because we are understanding the wide array of genetic conditions that put you at higher risk for autism.
Thank you, Dr. Vibha. Priyanka is asking, when my son, till the age of 2 years, he was talking and understanding everything, but at the age of 2 years, he stopped talking, engaging, no name response, no eye contact. Why it happened? Some docs said it is because of vaccine, or maybe he got sick, or something reverse of his milestone. What is the exact reason?
So, firstly, I want to acknowledge how hard it must have been for you to have that happen. And I want to say that it's not an uncommon story that we hear. There is something known as autistic regression, which happens in nearly 1/3 of kids, 1/4 to 1/3 of kids, where we do see this regression somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 years of age. And it is believed to be a phenotypic variation or just a variation in how autism expresses itself. Interestingly, in a lot of studies where they have gone back and looked at videos of children who then later showed autistic regression, there are some indicators in old videos, whether it is absence of pointing or nonverbal communication, that suggests that there may have been some signs even before the regression happened. But usually, in the absence of a neurological disorder, the regression does not happen again. Once it happens between the age of 1.5 and 2.5, I usually reassure families that henceforth there will always be progress and you don't have to worry that the child is going to regress again. Unless there is an underlying, like, serious neurological condition that is degenerative in nature. Unless that is the case, which is very rarely the case, most situations where there is autistic regression continue to show progress after that bout of regression.
Thank you.
No, it's not due to the vaccine.
Thank you, Dr. Vibha, for clarifying that. Monica, do you want to ask your question now? You said you've joined. Okay, I'll ask the next question. I want to ask about siblings issue of autism.
Are you listening, ma'am?
मोनिका, आपकी आवाज हमें क्लियर नहीं आ रही है।
Ma'am,
जी बोलिए।
am I audible now?
यस।
So, ma'am, मेरे को क्वेश्चन है कि ऑटिस्टिक चाइल्ड क्या ऑटिज्म कभी खत्म हो सकता है with social anxiety, fine motor delays, and also as
मोनिका, आपकी आवाज हमें क्लियर
मैं
नहीं।
एक बच्चे के साथ काम कर रही हूँ।
हाँ बताइए।
मैं एक बच्चे के साथ 2 साल से काम कर रही हूँ एंड मैंने उसके डायग्नोसिस के पेपर्स में देखा कि उसको ऑटिज्म नहीं है, वो अभी 7 साल की है, बट मैम उसको सोशल एंजाइटी है, वो भी हमेशा जा रही है एंड उसको लर्निंग डिसेबिलिटीज भी हैं, फाइन मोटर डिले भी हैं एंड ऑल्सो लो IQ है। मैम मुझे नहीं पता कि ऑटिज्म तो अभी है या नहीं है।
मोनिका, आई थिंक हम क्लियरली तो नहीं सुन पाए हैं। आप क्या इसको चैट बॉक्स में लिख सकते हैं एंड देन डॉक्टर विभा विल आंसर। थैंक यू सो मच। I'll ask the next question by Sujata. I want to ask about siblings issue of autism person. My friend has autism and she's trying to cope with the situation and her surrounding. But she says her sibling keeps bullying her as she feels. She feels her sibling is smart and she knows nothing. She doesn't complain, but sometimes she share her feelings, which are difficult to answer as parents. And as parents may try to keep the balance in sibling, kindly let us know about this issue.
Wait, she has a, I'm a little confused. She has a sibling with autism? Did I get that right?
She says my friend has autism and she's trying to cope up with the situation and her surroundings.
Okay. A friend has autism.
Yes.
The autistic individual feels that the sibling is bullying them.
Maybe I can ask Sujata to come in, and in case you're with us, Sujata, you can come in.
Hello, Doctor. I am Sujata. I raised this question. Yes, my friend has autism, and she feels when we talk about, she shares about her childhood or all that. She said in school she was bullied or all that, and then we tell her, how she can create some awareness, and she is good in communication sometimes. But she said, I tell other people that don't bully or all that, but at home, my brother also bullied sometimes to me. But we can't say anything regarding the family. And I think her parents are trying to keep balance, as she informed. But she said, how I can, but my question is, how I can tell her that, yeah, sometimes I feel I tell her, no, your sibling is a little younger, maybe bada hoga to samajh jayega bhai. He is 18-year-old, her brother. She's a 25 and brother is. So like I try because I have a sibling with disabilities who has cerebral palsy. I grown up with my sisters. So I have a different experiences rather than autism. But yeah, I can understand little bit her brother's feelings also because I don't know how parents are keeping balance or all that. And from childhood, brother might is getting outsider word apart from family, some kind of I don't know comments or all that. Acha teri behan aisi hai, because I grown up with that kind of environment. But now this lady, my friend, I don't know how to tell you because of this, or she herself has a autism.
Yeah. It's a really good question. I'm actually going to ask Nidhi to answer it since we're talking about young adults. But I will say very briefly that the issues of siblings are very unique, right? It's not always doom and gloom. It's not always bad. I think there are lots of studies to show that siblings of disabled children are more empathetic, more compassionate, have higher EQ. There's a lot of data like that.
More
Also,
responsible.
but I also have to keep in mind that the prevalence of autism incidence of young people with autism is also very, very high, right? You're 6 to 7 times more likely to have autism if you're a sibling of a person with autism. So we must keep that in mind that this is a possibility. And I don't know the 18-year-old. And it's hard when you have grown up with a lot of attention being paid to the sibling with disability. I think both of them need to be supported. But Nidhi, I'll let you say more.
No, I think Vibha, you just answered it all. I think I can have a one-on-one also later on, but I think you. Vibha, I'm just curious to also, just as a follow-up, are you seeing parents being autistic as well? We're seeing a lot more parents who are coming in for a diagnosis after their child has received a diagnosis. Just wondering your thoughts.
It's really very, very common. And, when we talk about how things have changed, that's one thing that's changed a lot. Like a lot of mothers, especially, who tell me that I feel that I have struggled with this all my life. And I totally see myself when you describe some of these symptoms. So I think yes, and it's been a relief for the parent as well. Some fathers, it's interesting because see, the gender issue is also very difficult. It's often harder for the fathers to explore that diagnosis as an option. And it's the mother, when she meets me alone, will ask, do you think the father also? And then we talk about what that might mean. But it's often very hard for the fathers to explore that diagnosis, though some of them have done that.
And does that have implications around how we ask the questions? Because just keeping in mind that there might be a possibility that the way the child is being perceived may or may not be. I don't know if are there any implications for us as professionals when we are meeting young people?
It's gone both ways, Nidhi. Like sometimes I will find a parent who can identify with the child and feels much more empathy and is able to relate more to them. But quite often, if there is lack of flexibility on both ends, the parent and the child, it becomes very difficult. So there can be clashes also because both are demanding something from the other. And the other thing I've seen is they're not able to, speaking about the whole spectrum thing. And so very often the fathers are very verbal, have jobs, doing really well, so forth, may have suffered emotionally through their lives, but haven't been acknowledged for all of that. And they are not able to see, oh, that autism is the same as this autism. They say, no, I can't possibly be like that because that is different. So there is that also. So it's complicated, is all I'm going to say.
So there seems to be a lot of questions in the chat box, but I'm trying to filter and see because we are also pressed for time, another 15-20 minutes that we have. The next question that I'm going to ask is, Dr. Krishnamurthy, can you please shed some light on the important things to keep in mind when working with high masking, late diagnosed autistic adults? Is there something a therapist should keep in mind while working with folks who are late diagnosed?
Nidhi, this question is definitely for you because I don't work with adults.
So let's focus on the questions for young children right now.
Okay. Sure. So many a times a gifted child displays certain social challenges or sensory differences that mirrors autism. So how does a clinician diagnose in that situation? Because from a schooling perspective, the label of mild or level 1 autism can be a stigma or challenge. It doesn't necessarily guarantee supports.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood that question. Could whoever asked that question unmute?
Shweta, what son?
Yeah, hi, that was me. So basically, I'm just coming from this space of, saying that some traits between a child who's possibly borderline gifted and, what we say is autism looks similar, right? But when how does a clinician figure out is it autism or is it giftedness? Because, personally for me, one or the other doesn't make any difference. But I think from a schooling perspective, the minute we say autism, schools take a step back, right? But then this child may actually have the skills to be able to do very well in the mainstream. So how does a clinician decide, is it giftedness, is it autism?
Well, it could be both, right? It could be a gifted autistic child. And I also think the question really is, what do we want to do with that diagnosis? How does it help you? Right? If you think the diagnosis of autism is going to help you in terms of how you approach teaching this child, or how you offer that child support, it's important to know, right? Because you could be a gifted child and you could be autistic and you may be struggling with, say, regulating yourself when you are sensorily overloaded in the classroom. Right? So to know that, he's so smart, how come she doesn't even, why is she acting like this even though she's so smart? Right? There is often that question. So in order to unpack that and see, is there a reason why the child is doing that? I think it's very important to understand that. I don't think giftedness necessarily looks like autism. If you mean uneven cognitive profile, where there is a lot of giftedness in nonverbal tasks and activities, yes, we could see that. In my experience, it's mostly been both. Like when we are seeing a gifted child where we are questioning, does the child have autism also? That is a possibility. So I would definitely explore that to see whether we can help the child with things that they are struggling with, like, self-regulation, like making friends. And at the end of the day, right, the functioning of the child is important. I don't know if people here are familiar with the F words of child development. So the F words are family, friends, fitness, fun, functioning in school and the home, and future plans, right? So we look to see where is this affecting the child? And let's go to that area and support the child for that area. And based on that, take a call of whether a diagnosis is needed.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. How common is OCD as a comorbidity in ASD?
I don't think it's common. I think some of the repetitive behaviors can look like compulsive behaviors. The difference in OCD is that it's a disordered thought process, right? It's a situation where you have an obsessive thought that keeps coming into your head, for example, that if I don't wash my hands 7 times, I will get really ill, right? So you're going to get really ill from germs is the obsessive thought, right? And the compulsive action is washing the hands 7 times. So it's a bit different from stereotypies in autism, in that the stereotypies in autism are often related to self-regulation. And it happened in moments of distress, excitement, and that kind of a situation. It's not related to a disordered thought that is forcing them to perform an action.
Dr. Vibha, could you please shed some light on differential diagnosis between level 2, 3 autism and intellectual disability? Does a person with level 2 autism necessarily have ID?
I'm going to have to go back and look at level 2 autism, which actually says I'm trying to think of whether it will overlap with ID, I think if you're looking at the communication aspect, it may, but as we all know, it is possible to have very low communication skills or be nonverbal and yet be extremely bright and be very, very communicative also through written language, other forms of language. So I'm going to say not necessarily based on just communication and repetitive behavior criteria that you have. It may not be, though it could be also. I mean, it is possible to have it without. I'm not sure what the purpose of making that distinction would be. Like, I'd be more interested in knowing what kind of support the individual needs. Nidhi, do you have thoughts on that?
Pretty much the same. I just don't understand level 2, level 3, level 1, because and I think there are some questions around this as well that in the chat, because oftentimes people who are speaking are considered to have lesser difficulties or are often referred to as low support needs. And I think it's more terminology than reality. So IQs again, when we think about ID, and we are essentially talking about either a global developmental delay or we are talking about an IQ, right? So
yeah.
You can unmute and ask a question.
Sorry.
Can we unmute and ask a question?
Sure.
Hi, Dr. Vibha. I'm Sangeeta here.
Hi, Sangeeta.
Two, three questions. I'm stuffing it into one. So when a child comes to you for diagnosis, when a family comes to you, let's say at the age of 2 or 3, and is diagnosed with autism, now the typical parameters are different levels of social interaction, communication, receptive, expressive, and the interplay, as you explained at the beginning of the session. Now, as they go along, when the child grows a little more and goes to school, and we realize that it's much more than just the communication and the social interaction, the cognitive ability is also highly impacted. The child is not able to process, understand, comprehend all of that. Then, as with many children with autism, they peter out, they plateau by the time they're in second or third grade or fourth or fifth. They move out of school. Very few are able to make it up to 10th grade. Now with NIOS and concessions and all of that, it's a little better. But even then, after getting the NIOS, they still don't know what to do with it because the original problem exists. So when do they come back for an assessment? That is the ID. The ID diagnosis is not given at the same time as autism, no, doctor. So they come at the age of 2 or 3, they're diagnosed with autism. Then they grow a little bigger and that other issues are there, right? So when does the ID part of it get diagnosed, doctor?
It's a really good question, Sangeeta, because I think that often gets missed actually, right? And I think reviewing regularly and reviewing not just the child's progress, but what are your hopes for the child in the next few months? Where do you think they should be? Are they realistic? Are they not realistic? Which part of the F words are you targeting? What are your goals for your child? Do you want the child to go out and eat with you at a restaurant? Do you want, very often I'll have someone say, of course my child should read and write, right? I want my child to read. Well, what would that make possible? Well, she'll be able to occupy herself. She'll be able to read the signs on a bathroom. She'll be able to go grocery shopping. So we shift to those as goals, and rather than should be able to read and write, right? And then if reading and writing happens on the way to that goal, great. But if it doesn't happen, there has to be a point where you acknowledge that, okay, we are going to be using pictures, signs, whatever it is, and that's not going to happen. I'll tell you, Sangeeta, even I am guilty of not explicitly stating the diagnosis of ID along the way. But somewhere along the way, I think there is an understanding that we are coming to understand what the trajectory of the child's development is. That to meet those functional goals, we are going to have to take alternative routes, change to alternative environments, and that is what will be helpful. So I think it's a journey, Sangeeta. I don't think, let me ask you in turn, do you think it's helpful to actually receive a diagnosis of ID? Or is it okay to just talk about, okay, functionally, this is what we want, so let's go about it a different way?
It helps because at least we know what we are dealing with, no, doctor. Otherwise, it's like, why? It's like, why is it that this child, ex-child with autism, was able to go up to grade 10, was able to go to college, was able to answer papers, exams, all of that? And why is this child given the same inputs, given the same environment, all of those things, this child couldn't do it? So what happens is when the family knows that they are functioning inside a certain, box, while you should never ideally give up, you should keep trying because you never know when a window will open, because you can't slot a person completely and say you have ID, that's all, you can't do it, right? But at the same time, we at least know that yes, these issues are there, so the parent is likely to experience less frustration. Second thing is, doctor, you talked about what do you want as a parent, which F word do you want to fulfill for your child. But apart from what the parent wants, doctor, what about the rights of the child?
No, absolutely. I meant that for a very young child.
Yeah, so that I'm talking about that part, doctor. The young child I'm talking about. That is there a way? Who should they be meeting, doctor? Who should they meet to understand what are the things my child deserves to know and should start with? Because sometimes it's highly possible I place my goals unrealistically high, or it's possible that I've accepted defeat and I've just slunk down. Even now, I still say that if we had just spent one more day at Ummeed, one day after coming to you, if we had to come back the next day and meet somebody for a few hours, if I had been given an appointment saying, Sangeeta, you'll get an appointment for your child with Dr. Vibha, but you need to commit that day two, you come and you spend this time to this time in X resource room. I wish that had been done, some system of that in a country like ours, with the number of people we have. I don't know how realistic it is, but I know that it can change lives. That parents go back with some kind of but of course, now today with the internet, the world has become that much
No,
more.
I actually really agree with you, Sangeeta, and we felt that lack, and we felt that piece missing, which is why, like I said, our family resource center was started because of that. Because we got feedback from families saying, you don't have to do it all. We know that you're trying to do everything in an hour and a half. We can help. And so the idea of, us being a community of professionals and parents and young adults working together to support families is actually the one that I really, really support. I don't think any of us can do it alone. I think we all need to work together. So I really appreciate what you said, Sangeeta, and I think that yes, we do need to work towards that. I agree.
And coming back to my original question, when should they come back, doctor, after an assessment? When should a second assessment happen to kind of take stock?
I
Should it
think it really
be
depends.
cycle?
I see families at least every 3 to 6 months. And then if the family requests, I want to come back sooner because I have a lot of questions, and I see them more sooner. Like
And then after that, at the age of 10, maybe, do you think that they should be assessed at the
I
age of
think so. So the touch points are certainly at various transitional stages or big
okay?
stages of transition. So one touch point is 3 years at entry to preschool. Another touch point may be 6 years at entry
Yes.
to school. Another touch point may be 11 to 12 years at the end of, at the start of adolescence and some of those issues. And another touch point may be around 16 at the time of transitioning to adulthood. So at the very least.
And when they become adults, who do they go to, doctor?
To Nidhi.
That's a good one. Thank you.
No, but actually, I didn't mean to be flippant about that, Sangeeta. I think that's a big gap in India is the absence of adult physicians, particularly who care for individuals with disability. Big
Then
gap.
they end up going to a neurologist or a psychiatrist, because then where else do you go? Who else
Exactly.
do you go to?
Yeah.
So there is that gap, where when families meet you and they want to know who should they meet. So what happens is centers like us, we end up interacting with the family, counseling them, and tracking through a transition form. Acha, where are you now? Where were you earlier? Where do you want to go from here? And all of that. But still, as you say very rightly, if there was a physician who could give opine there, it would be much better. Thank you.
Is it possible to ask a question, or we can come in between?
Yeah, sure. Please ask your question.
Yeah, I am Dr. Zai Joshi. Good morning, madam. I had a question. Is it possible to have a discharge criteria from our side? Like, after a certain limit, the therapies don't help. It's the parents who have to walk out and work in the school setting and do. So it's really, if we can have a universal, at least for our setup, uh, guidelines after which the therapies won't work, the parents has to work on their social settings. And what as an professionals we can do is to support them to take the help and cooperation from these people.
So I would say that from the beginning, that should be the pivot around which you work. That what happens in the therapy session is not going to work on its own. You can only as a therapist be a coach for the child and family. And just like if you go to the gym twice a week, you're not going to become a really fit person, right? You have to do all the other things: eat healthy, exercise, get enough sleep, all of those things. So a therapist can only be a guiding person who helps you set goals, monitors the child's progress, advocates for you in the school, advocates for you in the community. So I don't think it can, even in the beginning, be something that a therapist can do 3 times a week in the clinic. Is not going to produce results unless and until we are working on the environment, we are working with the family, we are looking at a biopsychosocial approach to autism. I think in terms of when do you get done with therapy, either at the point where the therapist says, I don't think I can help you anymore. I've done what I could. Or on the other side, the family says, thanks, but I don't need you anymore. I think we're doing really good. So I think either of those is an option, and I've seen both happen. So yeah, I think it has to be individualized like everything else. Right.
I
Okay,
think,
thank you.
thank you. I think it's almost time to end our session, but we'll just take up one last question. Any suggestions on how do we support a young autistic person who has trauma or ACE?
Again, I'm going to say this is more Nidhi's domain than mine. You want to comment on it, Nidhi?
Okay, so from a medical perspective and a physician's perspective, Vibha, be great to understand, is that something you would inquire, you would want to address from a physician's perspective?
So I'll just say, I think it's Sudhanshu who asked that question. So, and I think Sudhanshu can always ask you more later. But from my perspective, I'll say that trauma is not recognized enough. And I think it's important from a physician perspective to acknowledge its existence and things which may not strike people as a traumatic experience, like school, like a therapy session where the child is forced to do something. So many of these, I think, are not recognized as potentially traumatic to children, because trauma in children is what they perceive and not necessarily what you as an adult perceive as traumatic. Right? So I think this needs to be called out, particularly to the adults in the child's environment, right? To help them think about what might it feel like. Because people are very often, and that's why I'm talking about behaviors, using functional analysis of behaviors. Because when a family comes to me and says, he creates such a ruckus in the mall, or he behaves so badly in the therapy session, or, in our, at home, he's fine. I recently saw a family who said, at home, he's fine, but, gosh, every time we go to a relative's house or to a friend's house, he's so restless and he's stimming so loudly, and to help them perceive it in the context of anxiety, in the context of uncertainty, and how traumatic it might be to be physically handled, to be forced to do something without explanation, not understanding what is going to happen next, how frightening it might be for the child. I think that is part of what I do as a physician, help unpack it for the caregivers in terms of what might be things that are leading to the behavior. So we don't just put a band-aid on a bleeding wound, but we really look at, what was the inciting event that led to this? And could it have been traumatic, anxiety provoking for the child? So I think that definitely is in the purview of the clinician. Does that help?
Thank you so much, Dr. Vibha Krishnamurthy and Dr. Nidhi Singhal. Vibha, you have answered so patiently and wonderfully all the questions that everybody had. And as much as we all wish to stay and ask longer, we are committed for this wonderful Friday morning. So, yes, thank you so much. It is always so lovely to hear you. And we look forward to having you for more sessions with us.
Thank you so much. Pleasure is always to interact with this wonderful community and to chat with you and Nidhi.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we look forward to having you with us for our more training sessions. One more trainings webinar series by our own autistic people is coming up through the autistic lens. Today, the early bird registration ends. So I am sure most of you, some of you have already registered for it. If not, please do and take advantage of the early bird.
Yeah, I'm adding my 2 bit to that. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It's a wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Vibha. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. You have our numbers also. Dr. Nidhi shared the numbers of AFA helpline, the AFA website, the email ID also. In case you have any question, please feel free to ask. We can also maybe have a group picture. If I can request some of us had already had their videos on. If the others can also switch on the videos so we can have a. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great Friday and a lovely weekend ahead. Thank you.